Hello all, and welcome. So this video is going to be a little bit of a update video, because I've had some feature requests and things for ScratchBuffer, and I've also been asked if I'm still working on it. So allow me to tell you a little story about what's been going on with my digital signal processing endeavours. A few years ago, I started developing this, WireFX, a digital circuit builder where you can build your own effects out of modular components with inputs and outputs. And then at the push of the hammer button to build, it'll create a sort of flattened version of the circuit. A new instance is spawned behind the scenes which is an exact copy of this circuit, but it's used for processing. Anyway, then you can hear the results instantly. No need to close the host, rebuild, reload the host, you know, all that stuff. The idea is it could be used for rapid prototyping, which is what I were doing with it. I were using it to test various ideas out, which then I would code up natively. And you see, in this, lay the crux. The straw that broke the camel's back. And this is why I say, sort of, a flattened version of the circuit is created behind the scenes. Because it's about just how flat you want to go, or can go. For example, in this schematic here, every module that is used is a native module. And native modules are just compiled modules, they provided as DLLs, you know, the code. They're linked into the program at runtime, dynamic link libraries. And this is so that you can expand the modules with either your own created ones or shared ones or whatever. And then there were an API so that you could make your own modules and things. But that's not all. Because the idea is that you could then save one of these circuits as a module, a higher level module, if you will. And then you can have modules within modules, and before you know it, you're going to end up with some pretty complicated circuits and things. And obviously, the more complicated the circuit, the more it's going to tax your CPU. And so there were limits imposed by how I had implemented the flattening of the circuits. But that didn't stop me dreaming. Hell no. And at this point in development, well, there were no front end, like, I'll explain. The idea was that you can create a front panel, place some buttons, sliders and knobs and things on it, and, you know, labels, make a background for it, kind of thing. And then they would appear as outputs in the circuit, so in place of where these consts are. And these consts are just constants. Don't know why I'm struggling to say that, but consts. Yeah, so the thing about the constants is that when the circuit is instantiated behind the scenes, they are preset and then can never vary, as a low-hanging fruit optimization, because obviously any constants can just be discounted from being processed. So to hear any changes I have to edit the module properties and then hit the rebuild button, but it's still quicker than rebuilding the whole plugin after changing like a few values or what have you. And as I were making this program, I started to sort of get into it, the paradigm of it all. It started to become a more fun way of making effects, and you can treat it more like an art form than a science if you want, because it's just so easy to wire things up and see what happens. In any case, it's more like an engineering approach, hands-on, interactive, and much more intuitive, because let's face it, not everyone is a coder. Even this might be a step too far for a lot of people. But the idea is to create reusable, shareable circuits. Here I just loaded a really filthy ring modulator that I made for a laugh. And then it was time to throw it onto this cacophony. Boom! Oh yes. Oh baby. Listen to that baby purr. Just beautiful. Beautiful. So for things like this, it were working out brilliantly. But as I say, there were some limitations. So because of the completely open nature of being able to drop any module in and wire any input to any output, well, it gives the user a lot of freedom, great power, and with great power comes great responsibility. For example, it were too easy to do really silly things. For example, it were really easy to design circuits in such a way where you would have things upsampled and downsampled multiple times within the same circuit, and not necessarily with any rhyme or reason. It's just because you know nothing about digital signal processing, or even how to optimize things. Like, for example, you could maybe upsample once, do everything that requires the oversampling, and then downsample. But of course, you might naively build your circuit where there's multiple stages of upsampling and downsampling for different gain stages, and there's arguably other ways to do it. Better ways. And also, certain subsections of a circuit might be able to be multi-threaded, for instance, depending on how it's designed, obviously. But before I got to implementing any of that stuff, I started to have a little rethink. It was time to start building tools and a library to make developing plugins easier. And also to sort of establish a standard which is used across all of my plugins. And for scalability and maintenance, it just makes sense to have one library to have to worry about. So as I've been learning and implementing things, different plugins and bits towards plugins that I haven't finished yet, the library has been growing, but also maturing, and various things have broken. So, because a lot of the back end has changed, ScratchBuffer, the last version of it that I released, was actually kind of a band-aid solution in itself. A sort of spin-off fork, because I was changing things in the back end of my library and it no longer compiles anymore. But it will do soon, and that's because I'm going to be going back to the GUI stuff very shortly. As you can see, things are looking a bit tighter and are coming together. Now this that you're looking at is my digital signal processing virtual machine operating environment. It just rolls off the tongue. Its name could change, but it's unimportant because it's a development tool and not necessarily an end-user product. Think of it a bit like an operating system, except it's more of an environment that can run various tools and plugins, etc. There's a Alexa parser and assembler in there to compile programs to bytecode that can run on the virtual machine that's also integrated into the environment. And here you can see a text editor with the assembly code in. The assembly language now is more or less fully operational, apart from some interrupts and things that need some work. And also, obviously, we need floating point and double precision, which I haven't implemented yet. Now, this assembly language is not going to be the sort of end-user language. This is just what the compiler for a high-level language that I will implement later will compile down to. And then it'll invoke the assembler, which will pick it up from there and create the binary file for execution. What else? Yeah, so then it has a virtual file system, and yeah. It's sort of a plugin development ecosystem, and I'm going to be bringing the circuit design stuff over, so wire effects like stuff will be in this, but for the most part re-implemented and just better in every way. But this means that circuits could then be compiled into just logical code, and using various compiler techniques could be, well, it has the scope to be much more optimal than it was before. And this is just stuff that I'm yet to experiment with. Of course, I'd be keeping the ability to make native modules and things in C++, but it's obviously a lot more flexible if you can change code at runtime. And so that's why I embedded a virtual machine and an operating environment for it into a VST plugin. But this has obviously taken quite a bit of time in the background, and I've got quite a lot of things going on right now outside of this, which are slowing me down quite a lot. Not going to go into it, but the next GUI stuff will focus on theming, and once I've done that, then I can recompile ScratchBuffer and then take a look at some of the feedback that I've been given. Markers are obviously on the agenda, but I wanted to work on the MIDI stuff for that, but I've been thinking I'll put the MIDI stuff on hold for now and I'll continue with the audio side of it, because there's some things that I need to revisit for the MIDI side of it. To be honest, it requires a bit more thought in some ways. So yeah, that was my highly cut down explanation of what's taking me so long. The way I see it is, we've got a million plugins that are all like emulations of things, and that's all cool and everything, but all the big companies have pretty much got that locked down, you know. So I figured time was better spent if I put my time into making plugins that encourage creativity, or that add some other cool features or utility functions and things. Anyway, that's the plan. So I'll wrap it up here for this video. Updates will be coming soon. And if you like this content, feel free to comment, like, share and subscribe. You know the deal. Out.